Hello, and thank you for joining today's webinar, The Role of PTA in Supporting Immigrant Families. Before we begin, I want to review the functionality of GoToWebinar. Right now, everyone is on mute except the presenters. You can enter your questions in this box throughout the presentation as you can think of them. We'll hold time at the end for Q&A with the panel. Also, this webinar is being recorded and will be available on National PTA's YouTube channel and at pta.org/immigration. I would now like to introduce National PTA President Laura Bay, who is going to welcome our attendees. Laura?
Welcome, everyone, and thank you all for joining us as we share and learn today on this important advocacy issue for our children and families. As the nation's largest volunteer child advocacy association, with nearly 4 million members who are parents, students, and educators, National PTA is deeply committed to the health and welfare of all children and to making all families feel welcome, included, educated, and heard. That is why we are so excited to provide you with this opportunity to learn more from the experts in the field and from PTA leaders on this topic, and to engage in a dialogue to find out how you can support immigrant families and their children in each of your communities. Before we begin, I would like to thank our expert panelists for their time, support, and expert guidance on this issue. And of course, I want to thank all of you. You who are concerned parents, educators, and PTA leaders who work on a daily basis and on behalf of our youth, for taking this time out of your day to join us for this very important conversation. Welcome, everyone.
Great. Thank you so much, Laura, for that warm introduction. Our first presenter is Cindy Benavides, Director of Civic Engagement and Community Mobilization at the League of United Latin American Citizens. Cindy is a Honduran American immigrant who has experienced the American dream and now devotes her career to public service, ensuring that countless young people, women, and immigrants have the same opportunity. Cindy, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much, and thank you to the National PTA for hosting this webinar and for all the attendees for making the time. So I'm going to give you a little bit of background in terms of LULAC first, and then go into a little bit of what we're seeing at LULAC in terms of the rise in calls and what we're hearing from our LULAC members. So as background, LULAC was founded in 1929. We are one of the oldest national Latino civil rights organizations in the country. Our mission is to advance economic condition, educational attainment, political influence, housing, health, and civil rights of the Hispanic community in the United States. We do a lot of this through direct services and advocacy in more than 35 states, DC and Puerto Rico. We are headquartered in Washington, DC, and as background, we're member-based. We have over 1,000 LULAC councils across the U.S. who are, again, volunteer-led. We have 17 offices in 10 states and also have more than 56 community technology centers. Just to give you the landscape of where we are, I provided a map in terms of just the different states that we touch across the U.S. And so in the next slide, you will see that we cover almost all of the U.S. We still have yet to start councils in Alaska and Hawaii, but we're actually looking at them now. We recently did start a council in Tennessee, so we're really excited about that. And just to give you a little bit background in terms of LULAC and the role of education and how important education is for us, in the next slide you will see that LULAC was key in the case of Martinez versus Westminster, which challenged racial segregation in California schools. And this was the precedent to Brown versus Board. So this was brought together with LULAC as one of the leads, and LULAC members leading the charge for Martinez versus Westminster. We're super proud of this case because it did help us integrate schools in California and again served as the precedent of Brown versus Board of Education. And something that people don't really know is that LULAC started something called the Little School of 400 back in the 1960s, which was the model that was used to create Head Start. So for us, Head Start's very important in terms of how we look at education for our youngsters. Just some background in terms of the Hispanic community. In the next slide, in terms of the population change and what we're seeing with a growing community is that right now it's mainly due to births and immigration. So definitely there's been a slow immigration just in general of the Latino community from Latin America, though we did see a rise of unaccompanied minors starting in 2013, 2014, and certainly the schools felt the impact. However, the biggest growth is due to births of children being born in the U.S. And then I'll tie this nicely at the very end where you'll see kind of where we're growing and as we turn 18, how we can become even more involved. But again, just to give you a little bit of background and context, the biggest growth and shift for the U.S., for Latinos in the U.S. is due to birth versus migration. However, many of these children may be children of immigrants, so they may be first generation. Next slide. And then just so you know some of the issues that are important for us, economy, jobs, certainly at the top, along with the majority of Americans, and then education is absolutely the second issue. It varies year by year. This was actually done by Univision in 2016. And so healthcare education can be second, third place depending on the year, but education is a key issue for us. It's something that we deeply care about. And then you'll see that immigration, of course, falls in the top 5 issues, again, because it's so personal and because it impacts more than 7 in 10 Latinos in the U.S. And that could be because they themselves are immigrants or because they know someone who is an immigrant or because they're children of immigrants. So this issue is a very important issue for us. Next slide. And so what I wanted to really talk about is about some of the trends that we have seen, before November 16 and then give you a little bit of what we saw after November 16. So LULAC as a national civil rights organization gets calls all the time from the community. We are in the community. Our LULAC members are a lot of times the usual suspects and leaders in the community, hosting events, doing town halls, going into the schools, mobilizing the community. And so before November 2016, LULAC was seeing a lot of issues around labor, whether it was people calling to report that they weren't being paid for the work that they were doing, or discrimination-based labor, also immigration assistance. How do I become a U.S. citizen? How can I apply for DACA? How to do X in terms of the immigration system. Also about the scholarships that we provide, and of course how to start a LULAC council, among the array of issues. And the distinction that we saw after November 2016 was definitely an increase of calls of parents calling to say that their children were being racially name called, that they were being taunted. And so we definitely noted that. We also saw an increase in calls being reported for bullying. And so we definitely took to note of that. And then an increase of how do I report a hate crime, or we saw this incident happen, but we don't know what to do. How do we do this? We, of course, saw also an increase of how do I get involved and volunteer. Immigration assistance is a continuous issue that comes up when people call and that folks have seen on the ground. But I would say the biggest shift that we saw that was notable is that for the very first time, we saw a peak in the number of callers being youth, being children under the age of 18, calling to ask for help. And that for us was very, very concerning. When we took all these calls, we asked a lot of different questions to try to figure out what the situation was. The calls vary from state to state, so we definitely got calls from across the U.S., whether it was Texas, whether it was Virginia, whether it was Florida, even California. And what we saw is that there was definitely an increase in terms of people being emboldened to name call others or do racial name calling. And we suspect that this may be from the messaging they're getting from the media or just in general the current political climate. We also held a roundtable. We were fortunate to do a roundtable with Margarita Zavala. She is the former First Lady of Mexico. And in that group, it was here in Washington, D.C. We had individuals from Maryland, D.C., and Virginia, everything from, the nonprofits like LULAC to community leaders to parents to counselors. And during that private discussion, what we learned, and I'm sure that some of our panelists are going to go into this, was just some of the effects that the parents were seeing in their children, and also just some effects that the counselors were seeing in the children that attended their schools. And that included, parents saying, my children are very stressed to the point where they're losing their hair because they worry that I might be deported, and they don't know what they would do if they're in charge of their two younger siblings or how that would work out. And so there was this constant worry of what would happen to them, should their parents be detained or deported. And so there's that level of stress and fear. Mentally, we started seeing, the discussion that we saw was that a lot of the children, even starting as young as middle school, started to ask, why does it matter? Why does it matter to go to school if I'm not going to be able to go to higher education or go to college or be able to graduate because something might happen to my parents? And so, for us, it is very concerning because we definitely want to make sure that our youngsters are in school, that they're learning, that they're not stressed, that, they're not skipping school as well, and that they're there to learn and be able to complete their education. So for us, what we decided to do was to launch a series of town halls. And so if you go to the next slide, I wanted to give you just 5 ways to make a difference, and I'm definitely looking forward to the dialogue and discussion in case you have any questions. But like one thing that came to mind as an immigrant myself, and sometimes just not understanding the school system and how it functions, is for us to assume the best and understand the cultural nuances of parents from other countries. I was just yesterday at the Aspen Institute doing a roundtable with immigrants from across the region, and one of the things that came up was that when we get a letter from the school, when parents who may be of immigrant heritage get a letter from the school, usually in Latin American countries and other countries, it's because the child is in trouble. So we assume that we're getting a letter because our child is in trouble versus going to school for back to school night or parent-teacher conferences or something that's very normal in the U.S. So I think just understanding those nuances culturally of how schools are perceived outside of the U.S. is very important. So, it's not a lack of the parents not wanting to be involved. It's just making sure that, we understand that traditionally, if we're being asked to come to the school, it's because the child is in trouble. Or it could also be because the parent has multiple jobs and they just don't have that access to the school to be able to go.
Cindy, we'll need to ask you to wrap it up in just about 1 minute, please.
Sure, perfect. And then, on the other topics, definitely fostering a welcoming and friendly environment. So making sure that the messaging is relevant in language, whether it's in Arabic or Spanish or another language, and looking to see if we work closely with the parent liaisons. And then back to school nights, having a PTA point of person with the immigrant parents, and a lot of times some of the schools have parent liaisons. So just thinking through all that, or maybe having a volunteer interpreter, and taking time to build a relationship. Again, a little bit of cultural awareness. So, the word potluck is very American. It's a very cultural American term. So understanding that, for us to bring a plate for international night, it may be something that we would love to do. But in other countries, if you ask someone, hey, could you bring a plate for a dinner that we're hosting, it may not be perceived as as nicely. So just understanding some of those cultural nuances, but thinking of international nights to bring people together around a common element, whether that's food. And then lastly, launching an anti-bullying campaign just to make sure that, there's experts and speakers that are talking to our children so that they understand what bullying is, and how they can also report it. And so with that, in terms of the next 2 slides, just quickly, some resources for you. You can go to our website to learn a little bit about Know Your Rights. And this is knowing your rights if ICE comes to your door, if you're stopped while driving, so that parents understand that they have rights, even if they're immigrants, even if they're undocumented, they have rights in terms of what they can do. And then the importance of legal guardian forms or power of attorneys. And so with that, I'm going to wrap it up just so that the other panelists have an opportunity to speak as well.
Great. Thank you so much, Cindy, for your time and your passion and your expertise on this issue. We look forward to hearing more during the Q&A part of the presentation, so thanks so much. So our next presenter is Sarah Kathryn Williams, a research scientist in the Child Welfare Research Area at Child Trends, where she studies the well-being of children in the foster care system and evaluates the effectiveness of child welfare programs. Prior to her time at Child Trends, she worked as a special education teacher and a bilingual family engagement specialist in elementary schools with predominantly Latino populations, where she developed a special interest in working with Latino immigrant families. Sarah Kathryn, thank you so much for joining us today.
Awesome. Thank you, Heather. So again, I'm Sarah Kathryn Williams. I'm a research scientist at Child Trends. We are a nonpartisan, nonprofit organization that performs research to improve outcomes, programs, and services for children and youth. And while my research primarily focuses on children in the child welfare system, I have always been very passionate about immigrant child populations just based on prior work. And so I'm here today to talk more about the impact of aggressive immigration enforcement on children. So the next slide, please. So I'm going to start out first talking about how these activities impact the 5.1 million children in the United States who live with at least one unauthorized immigrant parent. So the next slide. When parents are detained or deported, children have a variety of different experiences. So the next slide gives you some more information about what these experiences are. It can be emotional distress and or depression. So for example, worrying that their parent is okay, they have an inability to communicate with their friends, and sometimes end up even with a negative perception of their own heritage. And another experience is economic instability, as their household is likely to have lost at least one wage earner. They also have fears about family stability. So kids are uncertain of or about what's going to happen to their parents. They don't know what's going on, and it's stressful. And finally, most seriously, permanent family separation. And this is when a parent is deported and the child or children remain in the United States. And another effect of family separation could be a stressed relationship between a child and a parent. So these are the main negative experiences that that kids have when their parents are detained. And next slide. We know intuitively that these experiences are not healthy or positive for children, in real time while they're experiencing them. But we also have research now that tells us how these experiences impact kids as they grow into adulthood. So all of these things, emotional distress and whatnot, are considered adverse experiences, which are events or conditions that cause an inordinate amount of stress to the maturing brain, and they can negatively affect development in childhood. And in particular, adverse experiences, they harm children's physical and mental health, and it also impacts their well-being as adults. So on the next slide, parental incarceration is another childhood adverse childhood experience, and it's very similar to parental detention for immigration offenses, because it's the same situation where a parent loses contact with their child. And while we don't have research on the long-term effects of parental detention or deportation, we do have it for the effects of parental incarceration. So, here we can draw some parallels. So on the next slide, I talk about how, so when compared to children who do not have an incarcerated parent, younger school-age children, age 6 to 11, they're more likely to have emotional difficulties. They also have lower school engagement, and they also are more likely to have school problems. So all of this is, when compared to a child who does not have incarcerated parents, and the percentage point differences were about 9 points with each of these, which are significant. And the next slide talks about older youth, ages 12 to 17. Those with an incarcerated parent were also more likely to have school problems by about 8 percentage points. All school-age children, on the next slide, parental incarceration was significantly associated with having additional or even more adverse childhood experiences. Some of the ones that I didn't mention are, racial discrimination or parental divorce or separation. And for children aged 6 to 11, they have 1.4 more adverse childhood experiences than kids that don't have an incarcerated parent. And for youth 12 to 17, that average was 1.7 more. So they have more of these adverse childhood experiences. And next slide. What really hit home with me about this is that all of these experiences have a compounding effect. So it's just one thing on top of another. It can't, one step forward, 2 steps back, right? So the experience, there's all this distress and fear and economic instability, and then on top of that, their parent is detained, which increases their risk for even more adverse experiences. And these adverse experiences are most damaging when they're cumulative. So when they're sustained, they lead to dysfunction, disease, and even early mortality in adulthood. So it's important that we think about what's happening to the kids involved in this, because it ultimately is going to affect, the future of our country as these children grow into adults. Because of the 5.1 children in the U.S. that have at least one unauthorized immigrant parent, 80% of those are actually U.S. citizens and are likely to stay in the United States until adulthood. So next slide, I'll talk about how, these enforcement activities don't affect just the children with unauthorized immigrant parents. It can impact children in schools on a much broader scale. So next slide, I'm sure you've heard in the news or experienced in your own schools or communities the ripple effect of the recent immigration enforcement. The ramp of these activities, and these ripples include psychological distress, bullying, and an impact on school climate, which touches on, Cindy already hit the nail on the head with some of those about bullying and and what's going on in our schools. So first off, on the next slide, the psychological distress. There's evidence that children with immigrant parents, regardless of the parental immigration status, these kids may experience varying psychological distress of misunderstanding of legal status. Young children especially may not understand their own status, much less that of their parents or other family members, and what that means. It just leads to confusion and uncertainty of what's going to happen. And they might hear things, equating all immigrants to undocumented immigrants, which, has a negative societal connotation in our current political climate. And regardless of legal status, a majority of U.S. Latino children worried some or a lot that they or their family members would get deported. And that percentage was even higher among foreign-born children, where 72% worried some or a lot about their families getting deported. And children in Latino families report significant levels of stress after seeing peers separated from their parents or other community members being detained. Next slide. The second ripple effect I'll talk about is an increase in bullying, specifically identity-based bullying or hate incidents. And so children and youth that are being bullied because of their, their immigration status or even their perceived status and that of their parents. So hate incidents are acts of hostility motivated by racism, religious intolerance, or other prejudice. So, if you feel like you're seeing an increase in these things, you're not crazy. We have data to back it up. And the Southern Poverty Law Center and ProPublica have been tracking these incidents. And next slide. Since February, between the 2016 election and February 7th, the most commonly reported motivation for hate incidents as part of their Hate Watch project was anti-immigrant motivation, followed by anti-Black. So that tells us what these crimes are about. And on the next slide, the most commonly reported location was in K-12 settings. So, when people are reporting these hate crimes, they're saying, hey, these are happening in our elementary and middle and high schools. Next slide. So we know that the problem exists. Children are bullied. And the National Academy of Sciences, here shows the different, they released a report that outlines the effects of bullying. So there are physical effects, psychosocial effects, academic effects. So much like we experience stress as adults with, headaches and sleep disturbances and whatnot, or we get depressed or we act out, the stress of bullying affects children in the same way. And importantly here for the school setting, kids they don't want to come to school, so they have diminished academic achievement. And the last ripple effect that I'll talk about on the next slide is the impact on school climate, which is the quality and character of school life. So when you have a positive school climate, kids are engaged, they want to go to school, they're not being bullied. They feel like they can go to teachers and be supported, when they need help. So if students are, stressed out, not wanting to come to school, there's this mean, morale at school, it has an effect on the overall climate. And we, have a significant body of research now attesting to the educational and developmental benefits of creating a positive school climate. So that climate matters to how kids are doing in school. And that was my whirlwind rundown of how all of this is affecting kids, both in immigrant families and, and communities more broadly. So if you'd like any information, on more on any of these topics, feel free to contact me via email or ask questions later.
Sarah, Kathryn, thank you so much for this presentation. You did present a lot of data in a very short period of time. I think we could do a whole hour on it, so we really appreciate your participation and expertise on this issue.
Awesome. Well, thanks for the opportunity.
Okay, next I would like to introduce Mary Kathryn Ricker. She is the Executive Vice President of the American Federation of Teachers. Mary Kathryn has taught in classrooms in Minnesota, Washington State, and Seoul, South Korea. She serves on the AFT Task Force on Latino issues, so her work includes advocating for unaccompanied refugee children and their families, rural and Native American advocacy, teacher diversity, multilingual, countering violent extremism and addressing Islamophobia, and school climate and ending discipline disparities. So Mary Kathryn, thank you so much for joining us today.
Good afternoon, and thank you so much. It is really a pleasure to be with the PTA today. Laura, thank you for that great launch, and thank you for that introduction. So I am a middle school English teacher, currently elected to be Executive Vice President of AFT, and as such, I get to join AFT's proud history of fighting back and fighting forward, really fighting for that great public education every child needs and deserves, for economic opportunity for every family, and for the rights and dignity of every person, which brings us to this webinar today. Our primary goal in this anti-immigrant political climate is to protect students, their families, and communities. And quite frankly, as you see from this PTA webinar today, every stakeholder plays a role in upholding the rights of students, whether they are protected by DACA, they are undocumented, they are refugee children or their families. Quite frankly, anyone who arrives at our school door. It's our role to fight back against bias, bullying, travel bans, breaking families apart, and the threat of deportation. One example of showing our advocacy at the American Federation of Teachers was a social media campaign called National Educators Coming Out Day, which was spearheaded by United We Dream. And I think there is a slide to give an example of that. If you go to the next one. And yeah, there is an example. And this is something that we've been taking part of in the last 3 years. So as a PTA, this is something you could collaborate with your educators on. The next slide, actually, perhaps if there are 2 important takeaways for you, this is one of the most important takeaways. Anyone who is in the business of working with students or working for students should know that one of the most important rights that immigrant children have in our country is the right to a public education. This was established in a landmark Supreme Court case, Plyler versus Doe. And the short of it is schools cannot deny enrollment into a public school based on citizenship or residency status. It is imperative to keep in mind. The second of the 2 most important takeaways perhaps we'll talk about today and is the next slide, that under the Family Education Rights and Privacy Act, often called FERPA, schools cannot provide information about students to immigration agents. So those are 2 landmark protections for the students we are talking about today that their families should also know about. So with that in mind, there are a number of ways that PTAs can collaborate with educators and school support staff, or can support educators and school support staff as they are helping to protect undocumented students and their families. So I'd like to highlight a few. I have 15 different tips for you, and I want you to look through these at your leisure, but there are a few of them. First and foremost, inform students and their families of their rights. This is something you can do, again, in coordination with educators and school support staff. This is something where you can support educators and school support staff as they are informing families of their rights. There are Know Your Rights materials. You heard about some fabulous ones from LULAC, who is a dear partner of the AFT. We also have some on our AFT website that I'll talk about a little later. But distributing those Know Your Rights materials to students and communities about what to do if a raid occurs or if an individual is detained. Also, find out if there is a local immigration raid rapids response team in your community. These teams can consist of various experts who may be able to provide support to your students and their families, as well as provide support to the educators and families in your building who want to serve as those allies to a larger immigrant community in your neighborhood or in your community. The next slide is going to talk about a few other things. Obviously, if there is any partnering you can do with those immigrant rights groups, any pro bono attorneys who have identified themselves, etc. I want you to look at 6 and 7 here, because this is 6 and 7 are key, and it's best to do both of these things. That is, providing a safe space for students to wait if a parent or sibling has been detained, and provide counseling for students who have had a family member detained by ICE, to identify these spaces and these opportunities before there is a crisis. Clearly, if you find yourself in the crisis and you haven't had the chance to do this, then by all means, build the plane as you fly it, as we all like to say. But this is the sort of work you can be doing now before a crisis hits your school community. And then 8 is one way of helping to do that, right? Maintain that list of resources, such as names of advocates who are going to be willing to do this work alongside you again, going back, finding out who that local immigration rapid response team is in your community. Those are those critical partners you're going to have. The next slide identifies some things right at a school community you could do as a PTA, again, either working alongside your educators and support staff or supporting them. Identifying someone at your school who can serve as the immigration resource advocate. This doesn't mean putting it all on one person's shoulders, but as you know, for a host of other things that the PTA is involved in, that having one person to at least stop and ask so they can disseminate is a really effective, efficient, and productive way of making sure that you are the best partner to immigrant families and those students as you can be. And then there's a powerful, powerful role, especially when you look at 11 and 12 here, for the role PTAs can, the powerful position PTAs can be in to make sure your school is an ICE-free safe zone by pushing for sanctuary policies, which could include your asking your school board or calling on your school board to pass a resolution affirming schools as welcoming places of learning for all students and distancing the school from enforcement actions that separate families. We are happy as a national union and working with our local affiliates, we are happy to partner with parents and families, PTAs, and organizations in any community to help make sure that we can do that together. And again, tap into that powerful voice. Also, going to number 13, I would say as a PTA, if there happen to be raids in your community or, or rumors of raids or a detention, issuing a statement condemning those raids or calling for the immediate release of students or things are definitely powerful, again, powerful advocacy roles you can play. And 14 and 15, again, are a couple examples of ways you can publicly share your support of undocumented students and immigrant students and their families. I will wrap up some of these issue areas by actually piggybacking on the first two speakers and also saying that educators and support staff can be powerful allies alongside you in talking with your children about bullying, specifically any anti-immigrant or anti-refugee bullying they may feel or think they're experiencing. Make sure children in your school communities know how not to participate and what to do if they witness it. These are intentional lessons that can be shared across an entire school community so that everybody feels like they are allies and we are in this together. So I know we want to get to questions, so let me just quickly mention that we do have 4 slides that will have some helpful tools and resources for you to help put together plans like this to protect and support your students from the threat of deportation. From this classroom planning document to these Know Your Rights materials I talked about earlier that are on the AFT page, and it's aft.org/immigration. You can see it at the bottom of this slide right here. And I would be remiss if I did not mention the last thing I want to say, and that is if an immigration raid does happen in your community, please report it to the United We Dream hotline. And that phone number is 844-363-1423. This is a poster you could put in every lunchroom in school community across the United States so everybody knows that an immigration raid can be reported. Please get involved. I hope I've offered you some great ideas for the powerful role you can play. Don't hesitate to get in touch with us for more information, and I look forward to any questions you have or any clarification I can offer about my ideas. Thanks so much.
Great, Mary Kathryn. Thank you so much for this very informative presentation and for your participation. We were so excited to partner with AFT on this webinar. So now I'd like to introduce Frank Kwan, who chairs National PTA's Diversity and Inclusion Committee. In his spare time, Frank is also the Director of Communications for the Los Angeles County Office of Education. So Frank, thank you for joining us today.
Okay, thank you for having me. This is such an incredibly complicated topic. It's very sensitive. It's also incredibly impactful. As you've heard from our previous speakers, that there is a high level of anxiety and actually fear in our immigrant communities. Here in Southern California, especially in Los Angeles County, where my office deals with 80 school districts, which represent about 1.6 million students, we see it all the time. We've done surveys with our district superintendents, and basically it says, you know, the survey results are there is just a lot of fear and anxiety and a lot of uncertainty as well. I think you've heard many reasons for that, and I think what we're seeing now clearly is a result of that. I also don't think that we are at the, by any means, at the end of this. This is going to continue for a fair period of time. So what can we do as PTA? I know what our office has done is actually provide resources to our schools here. We have 80 school districts, as I said, and we provide a resource page where we have all sorts of information. There is actually, in a sense, no lack of information that's available to people. I think the difficulty sometimes is being able to sort through that and deciding which source you really want to go to. So one of the things I think that PTA can do as we recognize the anxiety that exists in terms of being how close does PTA work with schools? I mean, we're right down at the school level. I think clearly we need to acknowledge that there's a high level of parental and student anxiety. That's very easy to see, unfortunately. And I think that's something where we have to acknowledge that and understand that some of our parents are dealing with this on a daily basis. And we've heard the kind of effects that can have on them psychologically, not just short-term, but also long-term. So I think as PTAs, we need to be able to recognize that with our parents, even those who are not PTA members at our school, and see if what we can do in terms of offer support to them. One of the things, as you've heard previously, is being able to work with your school district, not just your local school, but also the school's principal, but also with superintendents and boards of education and teaching staff and support staff. They're all involved in the big village that helps teach our kids. You've heard about the policy of the Plyler versus Doe, which basically says you cannot turn away students. And you also heard about the FERPA information, which deals with the next point, which is privacy of information. These are the kind of key things that we found here in schools in Southern California is, again, the high level of concern by immigrant communities about disclosure of information. I think that it's a message that needs to be said over and over again, that the schools do not disclose this type of information to federal authorities. I think that's something where parents need to reassure themselves, and PTA can work with schools and their own districts also, again, to reassure parents that this type of information can't be shared. All of this goes to protecting the students in, the students in our communities. And this is the kind of thing, again, where it shows that by working with PTA, PTA can take an active role in terms of helping to support immigrant families in our own communities. I want to spend a couple of moments here on resources that are available. As I said, there are a lot of things that are available, particularly through PTA. One of the newest documents that we have is actually a standards that talks about supporting immigrant families. And there are actually several standards. I won't go through them all. I think there's 6 of them. This document is also available at PTA.org/immigration, and it's not long. It's also available in Spanish as well, type of thing, or Espanol. But I wanted to point out one thing in the standards that I think you've also heard before, which is standard 4, which is speaking up for every child. I think that is so critically important, particularly for immigrant families, to be actually hear, not just teachers standing up for kids, not just even the school districts, but for PTAs to be able to do the same thing. This is such an impactful type of situation that affects people so deeply. It affects them emotionally, it affects
Frank, I think we maybe just lost you for a second. Are you there? Okay. So Frank, I may move on to our next speakers because I don't think we're going to be able to get you back for this part. So I'm going to, in the interest in time, move along to our local PTA example. So I'm very pleased to introduce Michelle Komazarski and Kelly Herbally, the president and treasurer of Grover Cleveland Elementary PTSA in Erie, Pennsylvania. So Michelle is the proud mom of 2 children. She's been a member of the PTA for 3 years and took on the role of president beginning in the 2015-16 school year. So as Michelle will be passing on the reins of president for the next school year, she will be soon taking on duties at the county level as secretary while maintaining an active role as member of Grover Cleveland. And then Kelly is the proud mom of 3 boys. She's held several PTA positions at both the elementary and middle school levels and has also been involved at the county level as past secretary, and she's currently the treasurer. So because of her involvement in the PTA, her voice has been heard on parent and community involvement committees. So Kelly and Michelle, thank you so much for being here and for bringing everything that we've talked about leading up to this point in the webinar to life. So I'm going to turn it over to you now.
Thank you so much for having us. I'm just going to get right to it. Grover Cleveland is a K-5 urban elementary Title I school in Erie, Pennsylvania, with a current enrollment of approximately 630 students. Erie is a sanctuary city and is known for welcoming immigrants. 20% of our city's population is made up of immigrants, of which many are refugees. Our school doesn't have the highest refugee population in the Erie schools, but we do have a significant enrollment. We are very familiar with the statistics because it does cost more to educate these students, and there is a major funding crisis plaguing Erie as well as Pennsylvania as a whole. Our PTSA has always tried to be inclusive because, like all PTAs, we just want people to participate. So bottom line, people need to feel welcome to do so. Next.
These numbers here are a couple years old, but they're the most recent available from 2015. The ones on the left are the numbers of English language learners in Erie's public schools. There's many more now in 2017. We actually have over 40 languages spoken in our schools today. Our own school statistics are on the right, just so you get to know what we look like. Our racial makeup, our poverty level, our special education students, and so on at Grover Cleveland. Our push for inclusion in the traditional cultural sense started when one mom noticed a student in our carnival food line. When she looked at the choices, which were just a hot dog and pepperoni pizza, she was disappointed and she frowned, her little lip went out, and she left the line hungry. That one mom started the change in our thinking when she realized the little girl couldn't eat the pork and the meat. So we started offering different choices like all beef hot dogs or just plain cheese pizza. Then we were lucky enough to have a new mom join our PTA who is Muslim. What better resource than her to ask about improving our food options? She explained that it's not just having a non-pork option, but it needed to be halal. She educated us on the term and explained it also mattered about the entire process of the food preparation. We were so dumb offering all beef hot dogs and mac and cheese, but our intentions were good. The best thing we did was simply ask that mom what she would like to see at our events. We wanted to include everyone and hook some new volunteers. She talked to other Muslim families at dismissal and encouraged them to go to our meetings and events. This time the parking lot talk mattered. Next slide.
This slide represents a great shift in our group's thinking. This was a very successful family movie night chaired by a Hispanic male named Tito. We were lucky enough to meet Tito at an open house, and we found out he is a major movie buff and encouraged him to sign up and help out with our family movie nights. Inviting one interested man turned into a committee of 10 people, 8 new members and 2 long-term members. Some of these new members only spoke Spanish. Communication barriers did not stop us. These barriers taught us. They taught us what true inclusion looks like. This was the first time we double-sided flyers with 2 languages. We also learned that inclusion lands you with your most successful movie night ever. Tito continued on as movie night chair for 2 years straight until his children graduated, and he is now an active PTA member at the middle school level. Next.
In December of 2016, our PTSA put on our first ever Multicultural Night, and it generated so much excitement in our school. Since it was so close to the holidays, we tied in a theme, how do you celebrate? Participants had the option to include celebrations of any kind, not just Christmas. You could do birthdays or even a good report card. So if you didn't celebrate Christmas, you could still be included. Our chairperson was originally from Guatemala and was inspired to put this on after attending her first Pennsylvania PTA state conference earlier in the year. Her committee also included Yari, a mom originally from Puerto Rico who first became involved at Tito's movie night. Yari comes to meetings almost every month and is a regular part of many committees. She's shown here in this slide with Janet, another mom who helped at movie night. The committee worked with our English language teacher, and we also networked through our membership to identify families who might be interested in participating in this event. We ended up with 15 families representing 8 countries and the deaf culture. The format for this event included stations for each culture to share traditional food, decorations, artifacts, and activities such as teaching visitors how to count or say please and thank you in their language. Each participant was given an allotment of $25 by our PTSA from our budget. This was to alleviate their burden of purchasing supplies. We also reached out to our art teacher who worked with the students to color different flags of the world to be used as a backdrop for photos and to display the many different countries represented at our schools.
This slide, if you invite them, they will come. We really publicized this event, sent home flyers, invited the media, both print and television, personally invited local politicians, the school board, the school district administrator. We created a Facebook event, and even invited the local cultural resource centers. Above you see Carla, our awesome Carla, pictured with our newly elected state senator Dan Laughlin, who thought our efforts were important enough to publicize on his Facebook page. We're really proud of this. Each attendee received a passport that they got stamped after completing activities at each station so they could have a lasting record of the experience. We also budgeted for small globe keychains and face paintings of the different flags. With this being our first event like this, Carla learned a lot, and she's really looking forward to improving upon the event for next year with hopes to have more outreach and create a bigger impact on our school and community. Next.
We did run an American concession stand during the event because it was on a weeknight and to help families get through the busy dinner hour. We also had like hot dogs and nachos and things like that. So our total budget for the event was $473, but we did apply for the Pennsylvania PTA mini grant, and we actually won. So the event cost us nothing to put on, and this was our proudest moment here with some of the kids and the flags that they worked so hard to make. Next slide.
Another way we help our families is our uniform giveaway. It's about 5 years old now. One mom brought up the idea of sharing our outgrown uniforms with students in need at our school, many of which are immigrants. We sent home flyers asking our school families to donate gently used uniform pieces and wrote letters to the editor. This yielded more donations from nearby churches and the community. We again created events on Facebook. We've grown this event so much that we opened it up to the public this last year, not just our own students. We gave away hundreds of uniform items for free, even shoes, backpacks, and winter coats. This is not an exchange where you have to bring a shirt to get a shirt. You can take what you need for free. We do have a limit to 5 items per student, 10 per family to ensure everyone receives something. This past year, it expanded. We had a local stylist and 3 of her staff donated their time this year and provided free back-to-school haircuts. They had to finally stop when it got dark because the event was held outside. This really highlighted the need in our district. The saying, dress for success, came around for a reason. We want the students of our school and our district walking through their school doors ready to succeed. We hope to further grow this event by working with other parent groups in the district in the future. Next.
To entice families to attend our meetings, we offer student care, probably just like a lot of PTAs do, with adult supervision, and we offer them snacks and drinks to make it easier for parents to attend. Our principal and teacher rep give an update at every meeting, which is a big plus for people. Education is so important for many immigrant families. Here in America, we're sort of the privileged and sometimes don't take it as seriously. And one mom told me something I'll never forget about why she joined PTA. She said, I want to know these teachers and the principal, and I want them to know who I am, and I want them to know who my kid is, and what better way to do that than PTA, which is so true. Next.
We just wanted to touch upon too, we offer very affordable, low cost or free events several times a year to our families. The reality is there are differences in financial culture as well, and with 80% poverty, it is necessary to include everyone, not just the 20% that can afford an event. This helps new families feel a part of our school and helps them be able to take part in our events. Next.
This is our last slide here, and it's just a recent example of I'm really proud of. Carla is such an important leader in our PTSA and such a great example for others. She continues to stay involved and encourages others to do so. These boys are Carla's, Yari's, Janet's, and mine on a recent day off from school. Carla rounded them all up to pick up trash that had blown around our school's campus in preparation for our big year-end carnival that week. So she's teaching these families to be proud of their school and to make friends in their community. And these just are some of the things that we all do every day besides live by the golden rule. We all do the best we can with the time and resources we have. And thank you so much.
Well, thank you guys for that wonderful presentation. Like I said, we wanted to save you guys were the finale, and we were so happy to hear all of the great work that you're doing. I got to talk to you both a little bit last night about just how you welcome families into your school community and the kind of questions that you ask and the kind of questions that you don't ask, and what matters to your school is the individual person, and that was just really heartwarming and wonderful to talk to you both. So I'm glad we discovered you. So thanks for all your great work. So now we're going to leave the last few minutes of the webinar for questions. So as I said in the beginning, please type your questions into the question box that each of you have. So the first question is, will the presentation be available as hard copies? I am recording the webinar, but I can also send out a PDF of this actual presentation out to everyone who registered for the webinar. So yes, it will be available. So let me just so I'm wondering this, here's a question, has there been any correlation made with the anti-immigration and the hate that's out there with the family engagement and family attendance at school? I am unmuting all of the panelists now. If you could unmute yourselves as well, that would be great. Sarah, Kathryn, I don't know if you have seen any correlation or if anyone else wants to jump in on, again, the relationship between the bullying and the kind of anti-immigration feeling and family engagement or attendance at school.
I'm not aware of any, hard evidence or research. That's something I could look into, but it's, anecdotally, yes. This type of fear in the community is keeping immigrants in their home, and they're scared to go to the doctor, scared to go to the school. So anecdotally, we know that there's that fear, but right now I don't have any hard data at my fingertips, unfortunately. But I'm going to be on the lookout for that now.
Great.
And I would say, like on LULAC, and anecdotally, we certainly, have heard it when we did the roundtable with Margarita Zavala, the former First Lady of Mexico, where the counselors were reporting that they saw an increase in truancy and in the number of from the students. And I can, I can tell you as a nonprofit, we do several events nationally. Right now we're doing town halls, a series of 50+ town halls across the country. and we've definitely seen a drop in terms of attendance. You know, typically for our events, we get anywhere from 100, 300, even up to 1,000 people to attend. So we've definitely seen that attendance drop. And I can even tell you with the Know Your Right workshops, you know, what do you do if ICE comes to your door or you get stopped in the car, that we've had to use Harriet Tubman underground tactics to get the word out, because people are so fearful that ICE will show up. So we don't post anything online. We text message. We talk to the church pastor to get the word out. And so we've definitely seen from our own events a drop in attendance, and especially because of the fear that the community is feeling.
Hi, can you hear me again?
Yes, Frank.
Hello? Yes, hi there, sorry. I did want to also report the same type of thing. There seems to be a correlation between these new fears and anxieties about immigration and bullying. And whether that bullying comes from locally or bullying comes from higher levels, I think what you see is the fear and anxiety and the uncertainty that results from that. So we made a very strong connection here in Southern California with our schools in terms of the immigration issues and bullying. I mean, they two seem to go together. And we're getting more data now as we survey our district superintendents here, but they definitely see an impact in terms of the consequences of all of the talk and all of the rhetoric that's been going on about immigration.
And then we received several questions about then how can PTA get more involved in welcoming families when they either are scared to come into the school building or don't really understand the role of PTA and how we can be a real source of support and advocacy for these families. So how can PTA proactively reach these families?
Can I just jump in on that one again, simply because of my involvement with PTA? I think that, you know, what we talked about before about that document that's available at pta.org/immigration, there are several steps that can be made. I also didn't get a chance to talk about our toolkit that's also available at the PTA, on the PTA website itself. Both of these tools actually, it's more about just this specific issue, although this perhaps is the flashpoint for it. But essentially, it's how do PTAs, particularly at the local level, engage with their own communities? And I think there are several guidelines in there, several suggestions, and a lot of help, particularly in the diversity and inclusion toolkit that says how you can actually make contacts within the community. I think I heard one of the other panelists say, have a contact person. If you could have a contact person who is bilingual or is able to speak the language, if not, that person is not the resident expert per se, but could be the linkage that sends that person to the kind of resources either through local organizations or any other types of things that are available in terms of resources. Have that person identified so that people in the community understand that they represent and can help you when it comes to parent issues and student issues.
Great, thank you, Frank. And then Sarah, Kathryn, this question is for you. Where did the stats come from in your presentation on the anti-immigration hate crime?
Those were, sorry, I had gotten my 1-minute warning when I was saying that part. And I forgot to mention, that's from the Southern Poverty Law Center and ProPublica. If you search Southern Poverty Law Center hate watch or hate incidents, you can find it online, which is where I got it. And they have a lot of resources on, you know, tracking of hate crimes and hate incidences. So.
Great, thank you. And then our last question, since we are over time, this person's school is 100% immigrant and refugees. Does anyone have any suggestions for resources on supporting Arabic, Swahili, and Somali families?
Yeah, this is Mary Kathryn from the American Federation of Teachers. There are several resources actually on AFT's site, as well as a site called Coloring Colorado that has a section specifically for refugee students as well as a broader site for immigrant students who are not necessarily Latino as well. I think it is really important some of the same actually suggestions apply, right? And that is first to reach out to your community to find out if there is a local immigration team that has already been put together. Very often these can be community leaders who are working alongside, again, maybe a group of attorneys. They might be working alongside other nonprofits like local ACLU, for example, the local teachers union. And then I would also say, given that educators and support personnel are working with students, with your population of students every day, having, finding time for the PTA to sit down with educators and support staff to find out who are they tapping into for the expertise they need to meet the needs of students. It may very often be the same expert that would be just as valuable to the PTA, and then you have stitched together a great opportunity for educators and families in your school community to work side by side.
Great. Well, thank you so much, everyone, again, for your participation on today's webinar. To our expert panelists, we really appreciate your time. To all of the attendees, we really appreciate your interest and participation. As a reminder, you can find many of the resources discussed today at pta.org/immigration. A recording of the webinar will also be available on both the site on pta.org as well as on National PTA's YouTube channel. And finally, I will send a copy of the slides and the presentation to everyone who registered for the webinar. When you get that email to me, if you have some additional questions for the panelists, you can send them to me, and I will make sure to get them to the appropriate person to circle back to you. So this concludes our webinar. So thank you again for your participation, and enjoy the rest of your day.